friends, I hope that you enjoy reading classic Gothic literature as much as I do, because I'm getting ready to announce my newest reading event, Gothic October Classics version. So I've been thinking for a while about a reading event that I could do centered around classic Gothic literature. I have really been wanting to read Gothic literature lately. I have a huge stack here of stuff that I want to get through. I don't like to read really creepy stuff. Like, you guys know, I have a lot of objectionable content. I don't like to read profanity. I don't like illicit scenes. I don't want a lot of gore and violence. I don't want anything like witchy or satanic. Just more of like psychological or historical based stories that are a little bit unsettling, but not enough to make you feel like you need a shower or a psychiatrist or an exorcist. So looking into it, I realized there is already an October event centered around Gothic literature. It's called Gothtober, but I wanted mine to focus a little bit more on classics and maybe Gothic light. Thus, Gothic October Classics version was born. So what is Gothic literature? It usually features some pretty consistent elements. So you usually have a house, an estate, a manor, some kind of setting that is contained within a house of some sort. There's usually some kind of inherited mystery or atmosphere. It could be a curse, but it could just be a family trait, or maybe some kind of family coincidence that happens, like for every, bride of the firstborn son, blah, blah, blah happens. It could be some kind of suspense or mystery that has been passed down for generations and has never yet been solved. It usually features an innocent bystander or an innocent person sort of being thrown into this unsettling, sort of dysfunctional family atmosphere. Oftentimes that innocent bystander is the narrator or the main character, and so that adds to the creep factor, right? Because they can tell something is not quite right, but it's not completely obvious right from the beginning. Think of Mr. Lockwood at the beginning of Wuthering Heights, where he shows up to sort of greet his new neighbor landlord, and he finds, some really uncomfortable things happening within this home of Wuthering Heights. He ends up staying the night against everyone else's wishes, and in the night some creepy things happen, and he is just very confused and uncomfortable. Not to the point where he's ready to run screaming out into the night, but just enough that he doesn't necessarily want to hang out there too often after that. You can't really put your finger on it, right? But it's psychologically weird, even though it might seem fairly normal at first glance. It doesn't have to be scary or gory or gross, or it doesn't even really have to be evil. The Gothic parts of the story of Jane Eyre are creepy, but would I call them evil? Not really. They're actually themes that really cause me to feel compassion. Same with Wuthering Heights, or The Little White Horse by Elizabeth Goudge, stories by Phyllis Whitney, or Elizabeth Gaskell, or even modern Gothics like Kate Morton. And even Gothic fiction that does deal with evil doesn't have to be gory or violent or sexually charged. Think of the story of Frankenstein. Creating Frankenstein's monster probably did involve a lot of gore and violent scenes. The violence committed in that book was horrific in person, but the author, thankfully, doesn't describe it for us in detail. She tells us what happened and then leaves it up to us to sort of let our imagination go as far as we wish it to. It's this kind of Gothic fiction that I prefer to read. The kind that sort of gives me all the feels but doesn't give me nightmares. I think this is a great time of year to read Gothic fiction. Things are getting darker earlier, it's getting colder, and it's much easier to feel the intensity of an eerie sort of story when you look out the window and you're seeing the shadow of leafless branches, or, the full moon behind dark clouds, as opposed to bright sunshine and flowers blooming. Doesn't really fit with the vibe. This is the time of year when we shut ourselves in both physically and psychologically. We tend to reflect more in the colder months. We take the time to wonder about things and the time to imagine. BookTube has a few other reading events that are going on within the month of October that align really well with this reading event that I am proposing. There's Victober, which is all about reading Victorian literature that was written during the Victorian time in the UK. There's October, which I just found out today, and I think is just a brilliant name and is super fun to say. And that is all about reading the works of Edgar Allan Poe. Of course, everything that he wrote fits in with this classic Gothic theme. There's the already established Gothtober that I told you about at the beginning of this video, and probably more. This particular reading event will be centered around classics, so you will need to decide what is a classic story for you. What time period does that fit? For me, it's anything published before 1970. That's what I'm going to count as a classic for this particular reading event for myself. But I will leave it up to you to decide what you consider as a classic for your particular reading for this event. There will be a group read and a group discussion. That is the book Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is my copy of Rebecca, and I think it's probably the only copy that I've ever read. I've read it multiple times. This was my mother's book, and she gave it to me a few years ago. Inside it says that she reread it in 1998 and 2012. But this particular version is a book club edition that doesn't record the date of the publication of this particular book. But it does say that the book was published in 1938, referring to the original edition. If I can, I'm not sure if I can host a live video chat on my channel yet. I'm not sure if I have to be at a certain number of subscribers. So if I can host one, I will, and I'll give you guys the dates for that in a future video. If not, I will just do a dedicated video to Rebecca, and then there will also be a discussion group in my Discord, which you guys can find the link for that in the description box. We'll just read it at our own pace, but then we'll have a certain date in the Discord group at which we can start discussing spoilers. So I'll put all that information in the Discord group when it's time. I have 5 optional challenges if you want to do them. The first one is to read an American Gothic classic. The second is to read a classic Gothic set in a country different from your own. The third is to read a classic Gothic short story. Number 4, read a classic Gothic poem or play. And the 5th one is to watch a classic Gothic film. I have a list here of some recommendations, just things that I've already read that are pretty familiar and pretty well known for the most part. And I just wanted to give you guys kind of a feel. If you're still unsure about, the characteristics of a Gothic, here are some examples of Gothic novels as well as kind of Gothic light. You might categorize these differently. My distinction really is whether the Gothic themes feature all throughout the story or just in certain parts of the story. That would be the Gothic lights. Not necessarily how creepy, scary, weird, thrilling or whatever it would be to modern sensibilities. Because remember, we're dealing with classics, and in some cases we're dealing with completely different sensibilities than we have today. So here are a few examples of classic Gothic stories. The House of the Seven Gables by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Anything at All by Edgar Allan Poe. The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. And a collection of stories that some may not be familiar with. These are thriller type stories by Louisa May Alcott, and some of them are considered Gothic. Since she is the author of Little Women and its various sequels, people sort of think of her as a more gentle author, but she did write this collection here, as well as another novel called A Long Fatal Love Chase, and some other stories that don't necessarily fit in that same theme as Little Women. And some of these are considered to be Gothic stories here. So you can find this collection in this, this book is called Behind a Mask, and it's a collection of some of the stories that I read for a college class at one time. And then here are just a few Gothic light. They sort of feature Gothic elements, but it's not a theme throughout the entire book. And that would be The Little White Horse by Elizabeth Googe, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, or Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And there are many more. These are just some examples to kind of get you in that idea of what we're talking about here. So finally, I wanted to share with you the books that I am looking at reading this Gothic October. So first priority on my list, besides Rebecca, which I'm really looking forward to reading again, I have a stack here of Gothic novels from like the mid 20th century that my mom sent me. It's a collection. Most of them were my grandmother's, and they're all really cool because they have like the original dust jackets on them, and they're super neat. And so I've been wanting to read more of them. I've read a few, so I pulled out the ones that I haven't read yet. So I'll show you these kind of rapid fire because there's a pretty good stack. But we've got Dorothy Eden. There's a couple here. I thought I had two by Dorothy Eden, but one might be at the bottom of the stack. But here's one, the Storrington Papers. Then we go into Victoria Holt. So we've got Minfreya in the Morning, The Legend of the Seventh Virgin, Bride of Pindoric. Aren't these covers just cool? Lord of the Far Islands. So that's a stack by Victoria Holt. And then we've got Phyllis A. Whitney. So we've got Spindrift, Listen for the Whisperer. Very cool Gothic scene there. Domino. Columbella. And The Winter People. Doesn't she look like a sweet, mild-mannered woman, Phyllis Whitney? And then a few others if I just get really saturated with mid-century stuff. I've got the collection of Edgar Allan Poe's tales, which I will be dipping into anyway because I want to participate in October. Elizabeth Gaskell's Gothic Tales, which the only one of these that I really remember reading is The Old Nurse's Story. I have read through this, but it was one of those things where I was like, I'm just reading it to say I read it, and so I really didn't catch a whole lot of it, but we'll try again. I can't say that I loved them, but I also don't remember them, so I need to give it another chance. And then finally, I found a Wilkie Collins on my shelf that I hadn't read yet. This one's called Hide and Seek. And judging from the back, it has a potential of being a Gothic. The scene on the front sure looks like it, so we'll see. I really like Wilkie Collins. He's like in my top 5 authors, so I do want to get to that. But that's it. That is Gothic October Classics version. So if you would like to participate, all you really have to do is read one classic Gothic fiction from whatever time period you deem appropriate. If you want a further discussion, that Discord is up, but I probably won't post too much on it until we actually get to October. But you can join it and be ready for it. I think this is going to be a really fun reading event. I'm super looking forward to it. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite classic Gothic works are, and I hope you have a beautiful day. I will see you soon. Bye-bye.